Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other mothers in the suburban neighborhood of Oak Ridge. While other women her age spent their mornings at yoga classes or coffee shops, Sarah was usually found in her garage, methodically cleaning and maintaining equipment that most people wouldn't recognize. Her neighbors knew she was former military, but they had no idea that the quiet woman next door had spent 8 years as one of the Navy's most elite operators. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday. Sarah dropped her 7-year-old daughter Emma at school, exchanging pleasantries with other parents who saw her as just another working mom. She wore simple jeans and a plain sweater, her auburn hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested the lethal skills that lay beneath the surface. After school drop-off, Sarah stopped at the local grocery store to pick up ingredients for Emma's favorite dinner. The store was nearly empty at 9 a.m., with only a few early shoppers wandering the aisles. Sarah moved efficiently through her shopping list, her movements precise and economical in a way that reflected years of military training. Though to casual observers, she simply appeared to be an organized shopper. As she reached for a box of pasta on the top shelf, Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Her peripheral vision caught movement that didn't belong. 2 men in dark hoodies moving with purpose rather than the casual browsing of typical customers. Their body language was tense, alert, and their eyes kept scanning the store in a pattern Sarah recognized from her own surveillance training. The men split up, one heading toward the front of the store while the other moved toward the back. Sarah's military instincts told her something was wrong, but she continued shopping, using the reflective surfaces of freezer doors and her smartphone screen to keep track of their positions. Years of operational experience had taught her to gather information before acting. When Sarah reached the checkout lane, she chose the one that gave her the best view of both exits and positioned herself where she could move quickly if needed. The elderly cashier, Mrs. Henderson, chatted pleasantly about the weather while scanning Sarah's items. Everything seemed normal until Sarah heard the distinctive sound of the front door's security lock engaging, a sound that shouldn't happen during business hours. The first man appeared at the front of the store, pulling a black bandana over his face. The second emerged from the back aisle, doing the same. Sarah immediately assessed the situation. 2 armed robbers, elderly cashier, no other customers visible, multiple escape routes blocked. Her SEAL training had prepared her for scenarios exactly like this, though she'd never expected to use those skills while buying groceries in suburbia. "Nobody move," shouted the first man, producing a silver revolver from his hoodie pocket. His voice cracked with nervous energy, suggesting he wasn't a professional criminal. The second man pulled out what appeared to be a knife, positioning himself to block the back exit. Mrs. Henderson gasped and raised her shaking hands, her face going pale. Sarah remained calm, her breathing steady as she evaluated the threats. The man with the gun was about 6 feet tall, medium build, early 20s based on his voice and movement. His partner was shorter, stockier, probably similar age. Both seemed more nervous than experienced, which made them potentially more dangerous and unpredictable. "Open the register, old lady," the gunman demanded, waving his weapon toward Mrs. Henderson. "Move fast, and nobody gets hurt." Sarah's mind raced through possible responses. Her training told her to assess, adapt, and act only when necessary. She could easily disarm both men, but the presence of Mrs. Henderson complicated things. Any sudden movement could escalate the situation and put the innocent cashier in greater danger. "Please, just take whatever you want," Mrs. Henderson stammered, her fingers fumbling with the register keys. Her hands were shaking so badly, she couldn't input her access code correctly. The gunman's frustration mounted with each failed attempt. "Hurry up. What's wrong with you?" Sarah recognized the signs of an amateur criminal losing control. His grip on the weapon was sloppy, his stance unstable. The man with the knife kept looking nervously toward the windows, clearly worried about being seen. These weren't hardened criminals. They were desperate kids who had probably never done anything like this before. "Hey you!" The gunman suddenly noticed Sarah standing calmly behind Mrs. Henderson. "Get down on the ground." "Now." Sarah slowly raised her hands, appearing compliant while actually positioning herself for potential action. "Okay, I'm not causing any trouble," she said in a steady voice that projected calm authority without seeming threatening. The knife-wielding accomplice moved closer. "Check if she has a phone." We don't need her calling the cops. As the second man approached, Sarah noticed several key details that would be important in the next few minutes. His knife was a basic hunting blade, probably bought at a local sporting goods store. His grip suggested minimal training with edged weapons. Most importantly, his attention was focused on searching for her phone rather than maintaining awareness of her position and capabilities. "Where's your phone, lady?" he demanded, staying just out of what he assumed was her reach. Sarah gestured toward her purse, which she had deliberately placed on the checkout counter within easy grabbing distance. "It's in my bag. You can take it." Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson finally managed to open the register, revealing the modest amount of cash kept on hand for daily transactions. The store's policy was to make frequent deposits to minimize losses during robberies, so there was perhaps $200 in the drawer. "That's it?" The gunman exploded when he saw the small amount. "Where's the rest of the money?" That's all we keep here," Mrs. Henderson explained through tears. "The manager takes the deposits to the bank every few hours." The robbers exchanged worried glances. Clearly, they had expected a much bigger score and hadn't planned for this possibility. Sarah could see their desperation growing, which made the situation increasingly volatile. "There's got to be a safe somewhere," the knife man said. "Old lady, where's the safe?" "We don't have one here," Mrs. Henderson replied honestly. "Everything goes to the bank." Sarah watched as the situation deteriorated. Amateur criminals faced with an unexpectedly small payoff often made dangerous decisions. Her experience in hostage situations during military operations told her that the next few minutes would be critical. The robbers would either cut their losses and run, or they would escalate their demands and become more violent. The gunman began pacing, his weapon swinging carelessly as he gestured. "This is garbage. We came here for nothing." His partner was growing more agitated as well. Maybe she's lying. Maybe there's money hidden somewhere. Sarah recognized the dangerous shift in their behavior. What had started as a simple robbery was about to become something much worse. She began mentally preparing for action, calculating distances, identifying improvised weapons, and planning her response to various scenarios. "Please," Mrs. Henderson pleaded, "just take the money and go. I won't call anyone. I promise." But Sarah could see in their eyes that they were past the point of simple robbery now. Their desperation and frustration were overriding their original plan. The situation was about to escalate, and when it did, Sarah would be ready to show these two young criminals exactly what happened when you threatened the wrong person. The quiet Tuesday morning that had started with school drop-off and grocery shopping was about to become a demonstration of why some people should never be underestimated, and why threatening a Navy SEAL, even a retired one buying pasta sauce, was a mistake these robbers would never forget. The tension in the small grocery store reached a breaking point when the gunman suddenly grabbed Mrs. Henderson by the arm and pressed his weapon against her temple. The elderly woman whimpered in terror, her legs barely supporting her weight as she trembled uncontrollably. "Maybe we need to send a message," he snarled, his amateur confidence growing more dangerous by the second. "Maybe if we hurt someone, people will start taking us seriously." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. Years of combat experience had taught her that the moment a weapon was pressed against an innocent person's head, the rules of engagement changed completely. This was no longer about property or money. It had become a life-or-death situation. The accomplice with the knife moved closer to Sarah, apparently thinking she was the easier target. "You," he pointed the blade at her. "Maybe you've got money on you. Jewelry, credit cards, something worth taking." Sarah slowly reached toward her purse, maintaining eye contact with the knife-wielding robber while simultaneously tracking the position of his armed partner. Her movements were deliberately calm and non-threatening, designed to keep both men focused on what they thought was compliance rather than recognizing the deadly threat standing just feet away from them. "I have about $50 cash," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "And my credit cards, if that helps." What the two criminals didn't realize was that Sarah was using their greed and desperation to position them exactly where she wanted them. Her years of tactical training had taught her that the best way to neutralize multiple threats was to manipulate them into vulnerable positions before striking. The gunman tightened his grip on Mrs. Henderson, using her as a human shield while keeping his weapon pressed against her head. "Empty out everything. And You better hope it's worth our time, or Grandma here is going to have a real bad day. The knife wielder moved within 3 feet of Sarah, close enough to grab her purse, but also close enough for her to reach him in a single, explosive movement. He was focused entirely on the potential money, completely unaware that he had just positioned himself within the kill zone of one of the most dangerous people he would ever encounter. Sarah opened her purse slowly, pulling out her wallet while maintaining her facade of frightened compliance. Inside the wallet, alongside her driver's license and credit cards, was her military ID card, a reminder of the 8 years she had spent learning to kill efficiently and silently in the world's most dangerous places. "Hurry up," the knife man snapped, his impatience making him sloppy. He stepped even closer, now less than 2 feet away, and completely focused on the wallet in Sarah's hands. Behind him, the gunman was growing more agitated with Mrs. Henderson. The poor woman could barely stand, her terror making it difficult for her to follow his shouted commands. "Stop shaking," he yelled. "Where's the key to the office? There's got to be more money somewhere." "There's no office," Mrs. Henderson managed to whisper. "This is just a small store. Please, just take what you want and leave." Sarah recognized the signs of an amateur criminal losing control of the situation. The gunman was frustrated by the lack of money, scared about how long they had been in the store, and increasingly willing to use violence to assert control. His partner was similarly agitated, focused on immediate gratification rather than strategic thinking. This combination of desperation, inexperience, and mounting pressure created the perfect storm for violence. Sarah had seen it countless times in overseas operations, criminals and terrorists who started with simple plans but escalated to brutal extremes when things didn't go as expected. "Maybe we should just shoot both of them," the gunman said suddenly, his voice carrying a chilling casualness that made Mrs. Henderson sob in terror. "Clean up loose ends, you know." The knife wielder nodded enthusiastically, apparently excited by the prospect of violence. "Yeah, no witnesses. That's what the pros do, right?" Sarah realized that these 2 young men had crossed a psychological line. They were no longer thinking like petty thieves hoping for quick cash. They were talking like killers. Her military experience told her that once criminals started discussing murder so casually, they were usually only minutes away from actually committing it. "Please," Sarah said quietly, maintaining her act of helpless submission. "We're just ordinary people. We don't want any trouble." "Too bad," the gunman replied coldly. "Should have stayed home today." What happened next would later be described by Mrs. Henderson as happening too fast for her to follow. One moment Sarah was standing with her hands raised, appearing completely helpless. The next moment, the knife wielder was on the ground, his weapon spinning across the floor while he gasped for air through what was clearly a damaged throat. Sarah had moved with the fluid precision of someone who had performed similar actions hundreds of times in training and dozens of times in actual combat. Her right hand struck the knife man's wrist with surgical accuracy, instantly numbing his grip and sending the weapon flying. Simultaneously, her left hand delivered a precise blow to his throat that collapsed him to his knees, struggling to breathe, but very much alive. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds, but Sarah was already moving toward the second threat before the first man hit the ground. Years of close-quarters combat training had taught her that in multiple threat situations, speed and aggression were everything. The gunman spun toward her, his eyes wide with shock as he tried to process what had just happened to his partner. His weapon was still pressed against Mrs. Henderson's head, but his grip had loosened slightly in his surprise, exactly what Sarah had been waiting for. "What the hell?" he started to say, but Sarah was already closing the distance between them with the controlled violence of a predator that had just revealed its true nature. The expression on her face had completely changed. Gone was the frightened suburban mother, replaced by the cold, calculating look of a professional warrior who had been pushed too far. Her green eyes showed no emotion except absolute focus on the task at hand, neutralizing a threat that had made the fatal mistake of endangering innocent people in her presence. "Let her go," Sarah said quietly, her voice now carrying an unmistakable tone of command authority that came from years of leading men and women in life-or-death situations. "Let her go right now, and you might walk out of here." The gunman's hand began to shake as he realized he was no longer dealing with a helpless victim. Something fundamental had changed in the dynamic of the situation, though his inexperience prevented him from fully understanding exactly what kind of danger he was now facing. "Stay back," he shouted, pressing the gun harder against Mrs. Henderson's head. "I'll kill her. I swear I'll kill her." Sarah continued moving forward with steady, measured steps. Her hands were empty, but positioned in a way that suggested she could reach him faster than he could react. Every step was calculated, designed to put maximum psychological pressure on an amateur criminal who was rapidly losing control of a situation he had never really controlled in the first place. "You made a mistake today," Sarah said softly as she approached. "You threatened innocent people. You pressed a gun to an old woman's head. And now you're going to learn why that was the worst decision you've ever made." The gunman's face went pale as he finally began to understand that the quiet woman he had dismissed as an easy victim was actually something much more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered. But by then, it was far too late to change course. The gunman's breath came in short, panicked gasps as Sarah continued her methodical approach. His amateur training had never prepared him for this scenario, facing someone who moved with the quiet confidence of a professional killer. Every instinct told him to run, but Mrs. Henderson's trembling form remained his only shield against whatever this woman was about to do. "I said stay back," he screamed again, his voice cracking with desperation. The gun wavered slightly against Mrs. Henderson's temple as his hands began to shake uncontrollably. Sarah stopped just 6 feet away, close enough to strike, but far enough to avoid startling him into pulling the trigger. Her position was calculated with mathematical precision, the optimal distance to minimize risk to the hostage while maximizing her own tactical advantage. "Look at your friend," Sarah said calmly, gesturing toward the knife wielder who was still on his knees, gasping for air and clutching his throat. "That took me exactly 1.7 seconds. Do you really think you can pull that trigger faster than I can reach you?" The gunman's eyes darted between Sarah and his injured partner, finally beginning to comprehend the true nature of his situation. His accomplice was alive, but clearly disabled, making sounds like a broken engine as he struggled to breathe through his damaged windpipe. What are you?" he whispered, the bravado completely gone from his voice. "Someone you should never have threatened," Sarah replied with deadly calm. Her stance had shifted into what any military observer would recognize as a combat position, balanced, centered, ready to explode into motion at a microsecond's notice. Mrs. Henderson, despite her terror, had noticed the change in Sarah as well. The quiet woman who had been pleasantly chatting about pasta sauce just minutes earlier now radiated a lethal competence that was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. Somehow, impossibly, help had arrived in the form of an ordinary-looking mother with extraordinary skills. Sarah began moving again, taking small, measured steps that forced the gunman to make a choice, retreat or engage. His inexperience showed as he chose the worst possible option, freezing in place while trying to make threats he couldn't back up. "I'll do it," he shouted, pressing the gun harder against Mrs. Henderson's head. "I'll shoot her right now." "No, you won't," Sarah said with absolute certainty. "Because you know that the moment you pull that trigger, you're a dead man. And, unlike you, I actually have the training to back up that promise." The psychological warfare was as important as the physical positioning. Sarah had learned during her SEAL training that most amateur criminals relied on fear and intimidation to control situations. When that fear was turned back on them by someone who genuinely didn't fear their threats, they often collapsed mentally before any physical confrontation became necessary. "You don't understand," the gunman babbled, sweat now streaming down his face despite the cool morning air. "We need this money. We're in serious trouble with some very bad people." Sarah's expression didn't change, but she filed this information away. Amateur criminals often revealed crucial intelligence when they were under pressure, and anything she learned about their motivation could be important later. "That's your problem," she replied coldly. "You made it my problem when you decided to threaten innocent people." Another step forward. The gunman was now caught in a trap of his own making. He couldn't retreat without losing face and control, but he couldn't advance against someone who clearly wasn't intimidated by his weapon. His only option was to continue making threats he increasingly knew he couldn't carry out. Behind him, the knife wielder had managed to get back to his feet, though he was still wheezing and holding his throat. He looked at Sarah with newfound respect mixed with pure terror, finally, understanding that they had attempted to rob someone far more dangerous than they could handle. "We need to go," he croaked to his partner, his damaged voice barely audible. "This is wrong. This is all wrong." But the gunman was trapped by his own masculine pride and criminal desperation. Backing down now would mean admitting that a woman had intimidated him into submission, an outcome his ego couldn't accept even as his survival instincts screamed at him to run. Sarah recognized this psychological trap. She had seen it countless times during military operations, enemy combatants who knew they were outmatched but couldn't bring themselves to surrender because of pride, ideology, or fear of appearing weak. These were often the most dangerous opponents because they would choose death over the humiliation of defeat. "Last chance," Sarah said quietly, taking another step that brought her within striking distance. "Let her go, walk out that door, and never come back. Or find out what happens when you threaten the wrong person." The gunman's eyes were wide with panic now. He could see something in Sarah's face that told him she wasn't bluffing. This wasn't a suburban mother trying to act tough. This was someone who had killed before and would kill again if necessary. "You don't know who you're messing with," he stammered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "We're connected. We have friends who'll come looking for you." Sarah almost smiled at this pathetic attempt at intimidation. During her years as a SEAL, she had faced terrorists, drug cartel enforcers, and enemy special forces soldiers. The idea that two amateur robbers and their friends posed any kind of serious threat was almost amusing. "Your friends are welcome to look me up," she said with icy calm. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I live at 1247 Oak Ridge Drive. Tell them to bring better help than you two." The casual way she offered her real name and address sent chills down the gunman's spine. This wasn't bravado. This was the confidence of someone who genuinely didn't fear retaliation from petty criminals. Mrs. Henderson, despite her terror, found herself staring at Sarah with amazement. She had known her for 3 years as a polite customer who always bought organic vegetables and asked about her grandchildren. The deadly competence now on display was like discovering a tiger living next door disguised as a house cat. "Please," Mrs. Henderson whispered to the gunman, "just go. Take the money and leave. You don't want to hurt anyone." But the gunman was past the point of rational decision-making. His desperation, humiliation, and growing fear had backed him into a psychological corner where violence seemed like the only way to regain control of the situation. Sarah saw the subtle changes in his body language that indicated he was preparing to act, the slight shift in his stance, the tightening of his grip on the weapon, the way his breathing changed from panicked gasps to focused determination. Her SEAL training had taught her to read these micro-expressions like a book. "Don't," she said quietly, but with absolute authority. "Whatever you're thinking about doing, don't. Because if you hurt that woman, if you even scratch her, I will spend however long it takes to track you down. And when I find you, you'll discover that there are worse things than going to prison." The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that even the injured accomplice took a step back. This wasn't the angry ranting of someone trying to sound tough. This was a professional promise from someone with the skills and experience to carry it out. The gunman's hand began to tremble more violently as he realized he had painted himself into a corner with no good options. He couldn't surrender without looking weak, couldn't retreat without losing face, and couldn't escalate without facing consequences he was clearly unprepared to handle. Sarah could see the exact moment when his desperation overwhelmed his judgment. His grip shifted on the weapon, his stance changed slightly, and his eyes took on the unfocused look of someone about to do something catastrophically stupid. In that instant, 8 years of the world's most advanced combat training took over, and Sarah Mitchell stopped being a suburban mother and became exactly what the Navy had spent millions of dollars turning her into: a weapon designed to neutralize threats with maximum efficiency and minimum collateral damage. What happened next would be replayed countless times in security footage that later became legendary among law enforcement training programs across the country. Sarah moved with the fluid precision of a dancer and the deadly efficiency of a surgical strike, demonstrating why Navy SEAL training was considered the gold standard of military combat instruction. The gunman began to shift his weapon away from Mrs. Henderson's head, apparently intending to point it at Sarah. He never completed the movement. Sarah's right hand shot forward like a striking snake, her fingers wrapping around his wrist with a grip strengthened by years of rope climbing and close-quarters combat training. Simultaneously, her left hand grabbed Mrs. Henderson's arm and pulled the elderly woman away from the line of fire with surprising gentleness. The same hands that could kill efficiently could also protect with remarkable care. Mrs. Henderson stumbled backward but remained unharmed as Sarah positioned herself between the elderly cashier and both threats. The gun discharge was thunderously loud in the confined space of the small store, but the bullet buried itself harmlessly in the ceiling tiles as Sarah's grip forced the gunman's aim skyward. Plastered dust rained down on the combatants as Sarah twisted his wrist with precisely applied pressure that made him scream in pain and released the weapon. The revolver clattered across the linoleum floor, spinning to a stop near the magazine rack. But Sarah wasn't finished with the threat assessment. In one smooth motion, she spun the gunman around and applied a chokehold that her instructors at Coronado would have graded as textbook perfect, enough pressure to render him unconscious within seconds, but not enough to cause permanent damage. The entire sequence from first contact to neutralization took exactly 4 seconds. The gunman's legs went limp as the chokehold cut off blood flow to his brain, and Sarah lowered him gently to the floor where he would remain unconscious but breathing for the next several minutes. The injured accomplice, still wheezing from his throat trauma, took one look at his unconscious partner and made the intelligent decision to run for the back exit. Sarah let him go, prioritizing the immediate safety of Mrs. Henderson over pursuing a fleeing criminal who no longer posed a direct threat. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked the elderly woman, her voice instantly returning to the gentle tone of the suburban mother Mrs. Henderson had known for years. Mrs. Henderson shook her head mutely, staring at Sarah with a mixture of awe and confusion. The transformation she had just witnessed defied everything she thought she knew about her quiet customer who always bought organic produce and asked about seasonal vegetables. Sarah quickly secured the gunman's weapon, checking to ensure it was safely unloaded before placing it well out of reach. Her movements were automatic, following procedures drilled into her through thousands of hours of training exercises. Even in civilian clothes in a grocery store, she handled the firearm with the practiced efficiency of a professional warrior. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to call 911, Sarah said calmly as she checked the unconscious gunman's pulse to ensure she hadn't applied too much pressure. "Tell them we have one suspect down, one fled on foot, and we need both police and an ambulance." The elderly woman fumbled for the store's cordless phone with shaking hands, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. Should I tell them what you did?" Sarah smiled reassuringly, the deadly predator of moments before once again hidden beneath the facade of an ordinary mother. "Just tell them the truth. 2 men attempted to rob the store, one was subdued, and no one was seriously injured." As Mrs. Henderson made the call, Sarah quickly surveyed the scene to ensure there were no additional threats. Her training had taught her to never assume a situation was completely secure until law enforcement arrived and took control. The fact that one suspect had escaped meant potential complications could still arise. The unconscious gunman began to stir, groaning softly as consciousness slowly returned. Sarah positioned herself where she could control him if necessary, but far enough away to appear non-threatening to responding officers who might arrive with limited information about the situation. "What happened to me?" the young man mumbled, touching his head gingerly as he tried to sit up. "You made some very poor life choices," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Stay down until the police get here, and don't even think about trying anything else. You've already used up all your second chances for one day." The gunman looked around the store, taking in the scattered plaster dust from the ceiling, his weapon now safely out of reach, and Mrs. Henderson speaking quietly to emergency dispatchers. The reality of his situation began to sink in as his mind cleared. "Who are you?" he asked weakly, staring at Sarah with new understanding of just how badly he had misjudged the situation. "Someone you should never have threatened," Sarah repeated her earlier words. "I tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen." Sirens could be heard approaching in the distance, multiple vehicles by the sound of it. The 911 dispatcher had clearly treated this as a high-priority call, probably because Mrs. Henderson's initial report mentioned gunshots and suspects. Sarah used the remaining time before law enforcement arrived to quickly review her actions and ensure everything she had done would withstand scrutiny. She had acted in defense of herself, and Mrs. Henderson used only the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat, and had not pursued the fleeing suspect beyond the immediate area. The first patrol car arrived within 5 minutes, followed quickly by 2 more vehicles and an ambulance. Sarah remained calm and cooperative as officers secured the scene, providing a clear and accurate account of events without mentioning her military background unless directly asked. Officer Martinez, the responding sergeant, was impressed by Sarah's composure and detailed recollection of events. "Ma'am, what you did here today probably saved lives. These suspects matched the description of 2 men who robbed 3 other stores this week, and witnesses say they've been getting more violent each time." Mrs. Henderson corroborated every detail of Sarah's account, describing how the quiet customer she had known for years had transformed into someone who moved like she was dancing, but dancing with death. Her description would later become part of police folklore. The gunman was treated by paramedics for minor injuries and taken into custody without incident. His accomplice was arrested 2 hours later at a local hospital where he sought treatment for throat trauma that doctors described as consistent with a precise strike from someone with extensive martial arts training. During questioning, both suspects provided information about their motivations and criminal associates that helped police solve several other recent crimes. The gunman, whose name was Derek Morrison, admitted that he had never encountered anyone like Sarah in his brief criminal career. "She wasn't scared at all," he told detectives during his interview. "At first I thought she was just acting tough, but then she looked at me and I could tell she was the real deal. Like she'd actually killed people before." Professional level stuff. Local news coverage of the incident focused on the heroic actions of an ordinary citizen who had prevented a violent robbery, but Sarah declined all interview requests. She had no interest in publicity or recognition for doing what her training and moral code demanded when innocent people were threatened. Emma picked up on the unusual activity when Sarah arrived to collect her from school that afternoon, but Sarah simply explained that she had helped stop some bad men from hurting people at the store. She saw no need to burden her 7-year-old daughter with the more violent details of the morning's events. That evening, as Sarah helped Emma with homework and prepared dinner, she reflected on how quickly her carefully constructed civilian life had intersected with the warrior skills she had hoped never to use again. The transition back to normalcy was easier than she had expected, testament to the psychological training that had prepared her for exactly these kinds of scenarios. Mrs. Henderson visited the next day with a homemade apple pie and tears of gratitude. "I've been wondering how to thank you," she said simply. "You saved my life." Sarah accepted the pie graciously, but deflected the praise. "Anyone would have done the same thing," she said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Very few people had the training, experience, and psychological preparation necessary to act so decisively under such pressure. The incident became a reminder to Sarah that her past would always be part of who she was, regardless of how normal and suburban her current life appeared. The skills and mindset of a Navy SEAL weren't things that could be easily set aside, even after years of civilian life. More importantly, it reinforced her conviction that training and preparation weren't just about personal protection. They were about being ready to help others when ordinary citizens found themselves facing extraordinary dangers. The 2 young criminals had learned the hard way that in a world where evil exists, sometimes it's fortunate when good people possess the skills to fight back effectively. As Derek Morrison sat in his jail cell awaiting trial, he often thought about the woman who had changed his life in the span of a few terrifying seconds. He never learned about her military background, never discovered that she was a decorated veteran of multiple combat deployments. To him, she would always remain a mystery, the ordinary-looking woman who had taught him that some people should never, ever be threatened. The morning that had started with school drop-off and grocery shopping had ended with a powerful demonstration of why predators who choose the wrong victims sometimes discover that their prey is actually an apex predator in disguise.